What's up, everybody? This is Dame with another quick cultural conversation. And today we're going to do a quick audit of the Democratic Party. We're going to see what went wrong in the election. We're going to see what's going wrong right now. And then we're going to see what we can do in the future and what it looks like, what they need to do to get back on track. But in order to do that, I had to invite a friend today. I got my girl, Dr. Sherice Janaye, political science professor and political analyst. And she's here and she's going to break it all down for us. And we're going to get right into it, y'all. We're not going to waste no time. Let's get it. Dr. Janaye.
Hey, what's going on?
What's going on?
What's going on?
Well, thank you for joining us today. You know, it's
course.
been a long time. I know you always have your finger on the pulse of what's going on with the party. You know what I mean? You always know what's going on with the donkeys. So let's first get into it, man. Let's get into the audit of the election. Now, I'll ask you like this. What does the blame pie look like to you in regards to why Kamala Harris lost the election?
Well, let me say this. When we come to the blame pie, I think that we need to call a spade and say that misogyny, sexism, and racism is the reason that she wasn't able to win. I think that a very poignant picture that has started circulating was Hillary Clinton sitting next to Kamala Harris and the look on both of their faces, right? To understand that what bonds them together is they're both women and the country is not ready for a woman to be in control, let alone a Black woman. So let's just start there. Let's start with the fact that we, after the election of Barack Obama, I think in some ways we're disillusioned or we were believing in many ways that the country was ready. So I think the blame goes in many ways to the country itself, right, for lying about the fact that they were ready. And what I mean by that is the polls, right, did not in any way reflect what we saw on the ground, right? So the American people just flat out lied, right, about what they were going to do and why they were going to do it. So I think that's where the blame is to lies with the American people. If we pick it up a pace and we talk about the operations of the Democratic Party, I think that we have to have a real conversation about how do we, in a big tent manner, satisfy all of those that are in the tent. And by satisfying those in the tent, we have to acknowledge who's actually in there. And white males are not inside the tent. And so if white males are not inside the tent, then we shouldn't be messaging to white males. We have to do a better job of messaging to white females who are actually the ones in the tent.
Okay, so I'm glad you said that because there's a few things I kind of want to pick your brain on and get your reaction to. So I agree with all that, right? I agree about the misogyny, the sexism, the racism. I know that played a big part, especially not in getting middle America. But I do want to talk about what I feel like could have been some missteps on the side of, you know, the Harris operation, or even bigger, because I don't really think it was the Harris operation, even bigger, the Democratic operation. Well, one, let's talk about when you say the 10th. I think one of the mistakes that was made, and listen, I by no means have anything against the LGBTQ community, but when it comes to political strategy, I think they put way too many resources and put way too much into the LGBTQ vote, which alienated a lot of those male Democratic voters. I said the one thing that Trump was able to do that could bring together racists, bring together Christians, bring together chauvinists, like, was basically say we don't rock with that gay shit. You know what I mean? Like that was his message. And I heard a lot of like Democratic voters like, oh yeah, I'm voting for him because I think they're going too far in regards to the trans stuff and saying kids should be able to transition. You know, I feel like a lot of those Christian conservative Democrats went to vote because of things like that. And also I feel like they would not let Kamala separate herself from Joe Biden enough. I think there were times where, look, Joe, you had to realize that you out of this race. We're gonna have to throw you under the bus sometimes in order for her to get the votes. Because there were certain things. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so on the LGBTQIA community, the same way that Trump was able to galvanize racists and Christians and all of these things around white fear, right? Around white fear and white loss, right?
Mm-hmm.
Idea of my whiteness has a currency and I'm losing said currency, right? The way he was able to galvanize them around that is the same way I believe they used the LGBTQ community to try to do the same thing. Because if you think about it, excuse me, you can have someone that is a part of that community that is black, white, Hispanic, right? It's across this spectrum in many ways. And so I think that the same way that the Republican Party or Trump in particular galvanized white folks around white loss is the same way that I believe the Democratic Party is trying to galvanize everybody around inclusion using this community. Now, the issue with that to me wasn't necessarily using them as a galvanizing tool, using the community as a galvanizing tool to say, hey, everybody has someone in their family that's a part of this community, whether you want to admit it or not. I don't believe that was the issue. What I do believe the issue was the messaging around it.
Agreed.
If you think about Tim, if you think about her running mate, Tim was like, stay out of folks' bedrooms. Let folks do what they do in their bedrooms. If what they doing in their bedroom ain't affecting you, then why are you so concerned, right? And I think that was the problem with it, is that it was the messaging, because the messaging then made it seem like you have to agree with it, right?
Yeah.
And the way that Tim comes onto the scene, he says, we don't have to agree, but we do agree it's none of my business.
Right.
If you understand what I'm saying. And so what I think, to your point, I do believe that turned voters off, but I think that if the messaging was better, it would have become a non-factor, and it would have been able to be used as the galvanizing force that it was intended to be. So I think that I think that you picked that out there, and I just think that they needed to find an affinity group, right? The Democrats needed to find an affinity group that allowed everybody to link arms inside of that big tent. And I believe that the LGBTQIA community allows all of us to do that, because all of us in our families, no matter what your religion, your creed, your color, your sex, no matter what it is, all of us are familiar with someone in our families that identify with that community. Right. So I believe that was a galvanizing factor. I believe that the messaging around it was poor, right? And the messaging around it was poor, that made certain people feel like they had to agree with the lifestyle. And I don't believe that is what the Democratic Party was communicating. However, the messaging was poor. Now, when it comes to Joe and Kamala, I have a theory on this, and it's called sage authority theory. And I argue, and I hint at this in my upcoming book, Visibly Invisible, The Women of the Congressional Black Caucus, that comes out in August. I hint toward this idea that Black women in particular, but Black women in particular, need what's called a sage authority to then validate their presence. And every time Harris got in trouble, they kept tapping the sage authority in many ways to validate her presence. And I think that you're absolutely right about the attachment to Joe. But I believe that if we look at any woman that has been even close to those ranks, it's always because they're attached to sage authorities. If we think about Madeleine Albright, if we think about Hillary Clinton, if we think about Condoleezza Rice, right? If we think about Susan Rice, right? It doesn't matter the woman, whether they're Black or white, there has to then be that sage authority that says that they have been legitimized and that they deserve to be in the room.
Okay, that makes sense. I just think, like I said, there were some issues where I'm like, if she would have broke with him on the economy, I think that would have helped. If she would have broke with him on Palestine and Gaza, I think that would have helped. If she would have broke with, certain subjects, I think if she would have broke with him, she would have been able to get some of those younger college voters. And also, I think they just spent, and this goes to what we were talking about earlier with the Democratic Party, I think they spent way too many resources on trying to get those rural white men, doing those bus tours, and that could have been spent trying to get, maybe some Dominicans and Puerto Rican votes, could have been spent trying to get some more of the Black male vote. So I think those are some of the missteps too. And like you said, when it comes to the blame pie, along with all the other things she was fighting against, because she had to run a perfect race. Also, with Joe not dropping out when he should have, you know what I mean? Like she had to run a perfect race with all that going. I felt like she almost had it because she was running a really, really good race. And I think they fell for that. What was that? They fell for that banana in the tailpipe when it came to like, oh, you need to do more legacy media. You need to do CNN. You know, like they remember she hasn't done a sit down interview. I was like, she should have kept doing exactly what she was doing. Her polling was going great at the time. And I think once she started doing those CNN and those other legacy media interviews, they were trying to really trip her up. They were really trying to connect her to Joe Biden still and say, well, basically you did the same thing as Joe Biden. And I think that hurt her as well in the long run in the race. So,
well, let's talk about legacy media though. I think that plays a role into about what the Democratic Party needs to do moving forward. If we attach this legacy media piece, I think that legacy media there has to be a new strategy on how you engage legacy media. And what I mean by a new strategy is, right, we've seen that the Washington Post, that's now owned by Jeff Bezos, we've seen that the Wall Street Journal, that a lot of them are getting away from their opinion columns because of people like me and you that have access, or that we have the ability to put out our own content. And so legacy media does not control in many ways the mindsets of people as much as it used to, right? And so it is still very powerful as far as the redundancy of message.
right.
And what I mean by that is that's what I guess I mean by the strategy. I believe that Democrats need to become far more savvy of coming up with one message. And when I mean one message. I see it happening a little bit now with this budget and these cuts and what they just got passed, right? One message, right? And if they use legacy media, no matter who it is, no matter what color they are, no matter what creed they are, no matter what sex they are, if they get on legacy media and keep to the one message, then I think that legacy media can be used effectively that way. But the problem is Democrats have a issue with getting one message to be repeated over and over and over again in the legacy media space. And so what happens is that people become overwhelmed with all the different messaging. And unless you're spending a lot of time in the field like myself, because this is what I do for a living, then you become confused, or you become turned off, and now you become apathetic about whatever's going on.
Exactly. That was a great call out. So now let's talk about where we are now. I don't know if you heard, well, I'm sure you have, but right now Democrats are currently polling lower than they ever have in regards to people just believing in them and believing in their message. And I think a lot of the stuff you already said is the reason that people feel this way. Like you said, people feel like the messaging is all over the place. People feel like it's too much going on. You know, people feel like, and like you said, like one thing Trump is good at is giving his base red meat all the time. Like he knows how to do messaging for his base. And I think the Democrats have not figured that out yet. So I want to ask you, what do you think is still going wrong for them currently? And what can they do to turn it around?
At this point, I think that the American people need to get burned. I don't think there's a messaging. I don't think there's any messaging that's going to save them at this moment. I think that the American people need to start feeling what these cuts are going to mean. And I think Democrats need to be prepared with a well-crafted message after they start feeling this pain. Because what people are not realizing is that he's not going to be able to stop midterm elections, right? And the reason he's not going to be able, the reason he, meaning Donald Trump, is not going to be able to stop midterm elections because elections are ran by the states. They are not ran by the federal government. And because they're ran by states, the only place he may have some level of influence on if they run them or not is in red states. And that's not favorable. Okay. We've also seen in these off elections, right? We've seen in Wisconsin, right? We saw in Nebraska, the first Black man to become the mayor in Omaha, right? We've seen in Wisconsin, right? The Supreme Court judge race, right?
Right.
Right here in Louisiana, the excise taxes and all the things that they were trying to do in many ways to further subjugate Black people here in the state of Louisiana have failed, right? A Black mayor in up in Caddo Parish, where Shreveport is, a Black sheriff ends up winning against this white sheriff neck and neck after they tried to cheat. So what we're seeing from an election perspective, if that makes sense, is that Democrats have been locally savvy enough to get their people out to then vote on the issues that matter. Now we have to wait for the American populace to catch up and feeling the hurt of what these cuts are going to cost them. And then we need to get a clear message on what that means about the person that's sitting in the White House, because that will then start to then turn the tide inside of the House. Because the only reason we are where we are, I would say politically, not necessarily from the landscape of the American public economy, etc., but the only reason we are where we are politically is because Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. As soon as the Democrats are able to wrestle away the House or to wrestle away the Senate, the whole game changes, right? And what I mean by that is that the whole game changes because he'll be impeached again, right? He'll go up on charges. The House will vote that he needs to be impeached. And if they can win the Senate, then they'll be able to remove him lawfully from office, right? If the Democrats are able to win. And I believe that's possible, right? I believe it's possible in these midterms, but it's only going to be possible if the American people start to feel what they voted for.
Okay. All right. I could dig that. Now, since we know that this is what's happening and what's going on, what they need to change moving forward, who do you see as the upcoming rising stars in the party? Like we talked about before we started the show, we talked about how Barack Obama kind of came out of nowhere. And what I say to people all the time, and people finally starting to believe me, I said, America likes stars. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how on paper you look. If you're not charismatic, if you're not an actual star, you're not going to be the president of the United States. You can go all the way back to Jimmy Carter, right? But you look at Ronald Reagan. He was charismatic. He was a star. He wasn't the smartest guy, but he was a star. You go to second Bush, because first Bush got in basically because of Ronald Reagan's charisma, right? But second Bush, dumb as he was, that guy was a star. That guy has charisma. America likes charismatic leaders. And I think that was something that hurt Hillary, in my opinion, as well. She just didn't have that charisma. She wasn't a star. Michelle Obama is a star. That's why people think if she would run, she would win. That's because Michelle is a star. Who do you see as like the upcoming stars in the party?
So let me tell you why the American populace loves stars for presidents, right? Because we have to remember, and this is where history makes a difference, and everybody says, oh, that's a past time, no one cares, but it matters. So we have to remember that the 13 colonies were formed because they were trying to escape the tyranny of a king, right? This overarching large figure. And so the American people, right, have always grafted to either fighting against that large figure, or then getting in concert with that large figure, right? They just all agreed that it couldn't be a king or a queen that allowed for this heterogeneous kind of this heterogeneous meaning through the generations of lines of people, meaning that we have to respect you as the star, quote unquote, just because you were born in this birth line. That is what we as Americans disagreed with. But we did not disagree with needing a star. And we see it all the time, if you think about it here in America, with the level of fascination that many Americans have with the royals, right? There's this fascination with the royals, right? If we think about Harry and Meghan Markle, right? They're now stars here in the United States and are living in LA, right? So I want everyone that's listening to understand that star power or charisma is built into our DNA as a country because of the country we left from, right? So with that being said, who has these characteristics? Because the star power is still attached, and this is the reason why I went there. It's still attached to a certain persona that is seen in a king or queen like manner, right? If we think about it, if we just use Michelle Obama as your example, she's regal, right? We see her as regal. We see her as deserving of our respect, right? We
Right.
see all of these monarchical kind of features is what I'm trying to call this, right? And if you think about, if we walk back to son Bush, it's the idea of he's one of us, right? He's the son in the family. He's the son in the royal family that got kicked to the side because he wasn't as polished as his brother Jeb. And we should galvanize around him as the star because he's always been more charismatic and always been more interesting, right? But in this same monarchical kind of way, he's not in the succession plan. And since he's not in the succession line, he shouldn't be the next president. And that's exactly why we're going to vote for him to be president, right? All of these kind of things. And what I think right now is that the party is lacking somebody with all of those characteristics. You need all of those characteristics. There are a few that I see that are becoming hell raisers, if that makes any sense, that is going to force you to deal with them.
Right.
Jasmine Crockett is a hell raiser. You're forced to deal with her, right? AOC is a hell raiser. You're forced to deal with her, right? However, I think that we are so focused in many ways on those inside of the House, right, in the federal kind of apparatus, that we're not digging and looking inside of these state apparatuses, right? Because you think about the Democratic stars out of Tennessee, right, who were censured from the House floor in Tennessee, and they've become stars, right? If you think about Gary Chambers, right here in Louisiana, who's a star, who's ran several times and is making a national presence. And then there's another that I talked to you backstage about, James Talaterio, as they say, or I may not be pronouncing it correctly, but if you look at him, he looks white, right? But if you listen to his values and if you think about his star power or his sincerity, I think that he is someone to keep your eye on out there in Texas. Number one, he's in the country of Texas, as I like to call it, because Texas is its own country. Yeah, it's in the United States, but it's his own land, and they had their own weird ways, right? He's a boy that's homegrown, right? He's like the 6th or 7th generation Texan, right? He's been there all his life, went to school for undergrad there, but went to Harvard to get his master's, right? Very Christian, values-oriented, Presbyterian, because he went to the seminary. And so I think he's somebody that we need to keep an eye on, because I think that we're going to start to see some bubblings from him. But I really want people to think about, who is it in your locality that's the star? Because if we think about Obama did not come from the national stage. Obama came from being a representative in the state of Illinois in 2004. When he stepped on that stage in the Democratic Convention in 2004 and made himself then nationally known, he was a sitting representative for the state of Illinois.
Okay, and the name is James Talarico.
Okay, that's even better, right? Because now I got a white face. Now I got a white face, right, with a dubious last name, right? That then gets certain folks galvanized for him because he's not traditionally Anglo, right? Yeah. And it gets another set of folks to galvanize around him because he looks traditionally Anglo.
He looks like Opie Cunningham.
Right. Right? I don't want to have a beer with him, right? He seems sensible, right? He's regal, right? He's attended the schools he's supposed to, right? He's loyal to.
He has the right story. He has the right
story. Yeah.
Okay. So y'all be on the lookout. And I think Jasmine Crockett, I don't want her to run for president because I think she's better served in different roles. You know what I mean? I think she's better served being able to let loose. And I don't think she'd be loose like that if she's the president. They try to tame her a little bit. But I like when she get loose.
No, I mean, you know why? Let me say this. My bonus baby sent me a clip of her and said, she reminds me so much of you. She was like, that thing get something in her head and she want to turn it around smart, she know how to turn it around smart and get your ass. I said,
He
oh
really
gosh.
does. Yeah.
And you need that, right? If we think about the Democratic Party, if we think about the maturation of the party, we've always had one of those, right? And in different iterations, right?
Yep.
A Maxine Waters, a Sheila Jackson Lee, Eleanor Holmes Norton. The party has always had those. Those have always existed, especially in the formation of a Black woman, right? And I speak about that really in my book, right? A Cardis Collins, right? We've always had these Black women, and I agree. And I don't think, to be very honest with you, Jasmine has any desire to be running for that type of office because of I don't think people understand the president doesn't have as much power as people think. Right. And I think that the latitude and the power that she has currently is far more to her liking. Now, what I do see her doing possibly, what I do see Jasmine doing possibly, is going back to Houston and running for mayor.
I can see that. I want her to take Nancy Pelosi place. That's what I would like to see. I need her to be the new gatekeeper.
You want her to be the new. Well, the issue with her being the new gatekeeper is you got to be able to get to that money.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest reasons Nancy Pelosi it has been the gatekeeper is because Nancy Pelosi comes from a political family that was very close in many ways to mob bosses out there in Baltimore. It is just what it is. Right. And that transferred to her being in San Francisco. Right. And so my thing is that if Jasmine is going to be the new gatekeeper, then we have to figure out whose deep money pockets can she attach herself to that is going to be okay with the style and the way that she executes.
Right.
Yeah. And that's difficult, right? Because white folks is with you until you say some stuff that they don't like.
Exactly. All right. So in closing, let's talk about moving forward. You talked about earlier the one message. In closing, Dr. Sherice Janaye, what do you think the one message is the Democrats need to galvanize around in order for them to make the, those leaps and bounds on these next races, on the midterms and on the presidential race in 3 years?
I think the message is that the Republican Party does not care about you. And they do not care about you because they are willing to give away money to the rich in programs that you have paid for with your tax dollars. Mm-hmm. That can be remixed. That can be remixed. That can be, parsing for every area. But that's the bottom line of it. Yeah. The bottom line of it is, the very bottom line of all of it is this. The Republicans have shown you they don't care about you because they're cutting the programming that you've already paid for with your tax dollars.
All right. I think that's a good message. And I think if they serve it right, that's something everybody can get around. So, Dr. Sherice Janaye, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for joining us. This was a great conversation. Now you have to come back.
I know. I guess I do have to come back, huh?
Yeah, now I have to get you back on as we go through the races, get towards the midterms or whatever interesting things that happen with this party. I'm gonna have to get you back on to talk about it. This has been a quick cultural conversation, ladies and gentlemen, and we will see you guys next time.